Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All of today's guests on Donnie and Dolly, including Farhan Lalji, standing by, brought to you by the Vancouver Giants. Giants have 3 regular season home games remaining at the LEC. Their next home game Sunday as they take on the Prince George Cougars. Puck drop 4. Get your tickets now at vancouvergiants.com/tickets. Of course, the BC Boys High School Basketball Championships going on
so good
this week at the LEC as well. We're joined now by Farhan Lalji from TSN in the wake of the Canucks' 3-2 overtime win over Anaheim last night. How are you, sir?
I am good. 6-2-1 in their last 9. Anything can happen, boys.
Well,
so mathematically, they can't make the playoffs, but hey, that's another story.
Okay, so that can't happen. Would you agree that JT Miller, who got the overtime goal last night and a shorthanded marker earlier, would you agree he's playing much better hockey under Rick Tocchet?
Yeah, absolutely. He is playing his best hockey. And look, he's shown the ability to play very good hockey under other head coaches, right? He did it for Travis Green. He did it for Bruce Boudreau last year. But I think what he's showing now, and we've always known that, you know, the offensive game is there. So when he signed his contract, I don't think 99 points was ever something we all felt was sustainable or going to be indicative of whether or not he was worthy of the contract. You know, if he could get to the mid-80s, which he may not get to this year, but, you know, he could get to the high 70s. But if he could get to the mid-80s, that justifies the number. The question always was, could he be a full-time center, and could he play the game the right way defensively, especially from the center position? And he's showing signs of life with that under Rick Tocchet. I think he looks better in that regard. I think the defensive mistakes, there aren't as many of them. There still are a few. There still are a few puck management issues in his own end, but they don't wind up in the back of the net. So it certainly helps when you got a guy like Thatcher Demko. But there's less of those. You know, last night was a pretty good JT Miller game. He was good in the faceoff circle. His attempts were good. His shot share was good. There was a lot of those other things that we're seeing when he's not playing with Elias Pettersson. They just don't always go well. So I think he's finding his game from the middle of the ice, and the Canucks desperately need him to be a center, given the current state of the franchise at that position.
Your opinion, how do you think Canuck fans should feel about their 6-2-1 record in the last 9 games? Clearly they're an improved team, but you still have a lot of people upset that they traded away a high draft pick. 2 of them, in fact.
Yeah, you know, I think they should feel conflicted. And I think they bought high on Filip Hronek, right? Like, could they have gotten him for less than a first and a second? Obviously, he's a really good player, and he wasn't going to come cheap, right? But could they have even protected the first and other things like that? Could it have been a first and a fourth? I don't know. But could they have done something to minimize that asset a little bit? And it sounds like they put themselves in a situation where Detroit knew they were really, really interested in the player. And now they also, when you give up a first and a second, you also lose leverage, you know, as Elliot Friedman has said, right? Like, you lose leverage on the contract negotiations, right? Because he's got one more year left on his deal, and they could open up a negotiations for him at the end of the season. But, you know, honestly, I think he should feel conflicted, right? Because I get why you would want to finish as low as possible, to have the best shot possible, not just Connor Bedard, but a really good draft, right? In the top 5 in that draft is thought to be very, very good players who could come and help quickly, like roster players next year or within the next 2 players, or 2 years. So I get that, but you can't expect that from players. And here's the thing for me. There's not a lot of other moves they could make, right? Like, maybe you could give some of these guys a bit more ice time. The younger guys, they're starting to do that. Maybe you could bring up Jack Rathbone and give him another shot as a part of a more structured system than what they were playing under Bruce Boudreau. You know, there's a few things, but by and large, the young guys are here. So I don't know that you could be too critical of the organization today for what's not happening roster-wise.
All right, we want to talk a little NFL. Former Lions quarterback Nathan Rourke. Story came out this week. Farhan, $5,000 signing bonus with Jacksonville. But Henry Burris, who played a big role in him going there, is no longer with Jacksonville. And they've also signed, since his signing, their backup quarterback. Knowing all this now, Farhan, what are your thoughts on Nathan Rourke signing now in Jacksonville?
Well, I knew it all then, so I don't know why the story's coming out now, because like a month ago when he signed, I knew the signing bonus was $5,000, which is irrelevant because it's the roster guarantee, right? Like, the P5 roster guarantee is what matters for a player like Nathan, because if you've never been drafted or signed and been to an NFL camp, you're part of a $75,000 bonus pool. That's total, not for one player, but total. And that gets spread out amongst like 20 different players, right? All the UDFAs that get signed after the draft and all that. So he was never going to get a meaningful signing bonus. It was what percentage of your first year salary is guaranteed. And for him, it's over $200,000. So they could cut him day one of training camp or before, and he still gets $200,000. So he's going to be there for the entire season. And I knew Henry got let go about a month ago or shortly after the Rourke signing. And that surprised me. I didn't see that coming back then. And I certainly have talked to Nathan and Henry since then. But I think there's a feeling that Henry was certainly an advocate, but there were other people in that building that got personally involved during the workout and during the process of getting him signed. So, I do think that's gonna be a good setup for him. And ultimately, they were never going to hand him the number 2 job, right? Mm-hmm. He was going to have to compete with somebody for it. And CJ Beathard isn't a high salary, high priced guy. So, does it mean that it's more likely that maybe he opens up the season on the practice roster than the active roster? Because in the NFL, you can only sign 2. Probably, but he'll be there the whole year. And I do expect you're going to see some time with Nathan on the roster as the season progresses. But the main thing is he's going to get a ton of training camp reps, and he's going to get a ton of preseason reps as that team looks to protect Trevor Lawrence. So he'll get every opportunity to show how good he is. And that's really all you can ask. If he has a great preseason, he'll be there.
Farhan, 3 years, $105 million. And no, we're not talking about Rick's salary. We're talking about Geno Smith. Are you a fan of the Seahawks' decision to extend him?
Yeah, I think that contract was a win-win. It was worth it for both players. He got a big raise. He earned it, but it's not a crazy amount of guaranteed money and not a crazy amount of term, right? So it's $25,000 a year in terms of what his base salary is for each of the next 3 years, and there's some guarantees. There's a $40,000, or 40 of it is guaranteed, right? So the Seahawks are protected. The player earns a lot more money, and I think that hasn't precluded them from drafting a guy high. All of that said, I hope they don't, because the way things are playing out in the draft right now, some of those other quarterbacks are going to get elevated. And you certainly don't want to be a Seahawks team trading to move up to 3 or 2 to get a quarterback. I think if all of a sudden C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young falls to them at 5, great, take him, which I don't think is going to happen. I think those are clearly the 2 best, and then Levis and Richardson have a lot more questions, but are in the next tier. But if all of a sudden a couple of those guys get traded high and Will Anderson or Jalen Carter's available, the 2 defensive linemen, where you need desperate help at D-line, and they fall to you at 5, you would be crazy not to take them. So win-win. Geno's only going to get better. Is he a Super Bowl pedigree quarterback? I don't know, but he can get him a couple of rounds into the playoffs for sure, and they can address some other issues which they really need to address. So win-win, unlike the Daniel Jones contract, which I think was lunacy on the part of the New York Giants to give him as much guaranteed money in term not so much, but the guaranteed money that they gave him, plus the incentives on top of that, insanity for a guy that's had one average season. Geno last year was way better than Daniel Jones. And I'm a big Lamar Jackson fan, but the fact that this is give me Deshaun Watson's deal or I'm out, because the Deshaun Watson deal was a mistake. And I get why other owners don't want to go down that road of a fully guaranteed contract. But as far as the Seahawks are concerned, they did a good job with Geno Smith's deal.
Yeah, 4 years, $160 million. Not all that guaranteed for Daniel Jones, and that
plus $35 million in incentives.
Yeah,
for sure.
Head scratcher. Farhan, thanks for doing this. We're running behind. Otherwise, we'd keep you longer. I know you want to stay, but we got to get going, buddy. All right, thanks for this.
I love talking to you guys all the time. See you guys.
Okay, Farhan Lalji.